I know I'm going to get carried away and dribble on about this one,
I don't
but
care. Do it.
well, I already am. I'm in the process of it. But we made a surprise little trip, ducked over to Germany to go to Neander Valley. This is where Neanderthal was first found, and unfortunately the museum is closed for a little while over the Christmas break, so we're a bit disappointed, but at least we can come to the valley and have a walk around, have a look at a few of the places, because it was right here where the first Neanderthals were found, and that's why, evidently, that's why it's named after it. And because, and here goes, you know how when 7 million years ago we separated from chimpanzees and humans went off onto their own course, we went through this whole period where we were Australopithecine. So you had Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus afarensis, and so on and so forth. Best example of one is Lucy. She was Australopithecus afarensis because of her jawbone and her brain case, which differentiated her. And she was found in 1974, and she's dated at about 3 million years old. She's the first example of bipedalism. And the reason she's called Lucy is because in camp, Donaldson and all his mates, when they were in camp, they were listening to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds when the first night that they'd found her, so they thought there's no more fitting way. Eventually we moved on to becoming hominids, and that's where the Homo species come into it. So early on when we were hominids, we had we went through all the Homos. We had Homo ergaster, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo naledi. I'll come back to Homo naledi. Floriensis, we just had all these different ones, and we are Homo sapiens. We're the only ones left now. But if you have any interest in looking these things up, I'll put a link on this when I put it up, a link on this to a YouTube program about what Lee Berger did when they discovered Homo naledi in the Rising Star Cave in Africa, considerably south of the Olduvai Gorge, but in northern Johannesburg. And they excavated, well, they didn't excavate, but they went down into the Rising Star Caves in 2013 with they sent a group of people down there because it was very narrow. You watch that, a 45-minute program, it's just absolutely amazing. I don't script these things, so sometimes I remember as I'm going. I should point out that Neanderthals, Homo neanderthals, they existed from about 800,000 years ago up until about 40,000 years ago. And as they died out just before that, the Cro-Magnons had come along. So what we're looking at here, trying to imagine the people who lived here, these early humans, a lot would have changed in 40,000 years, but you still do get a very good idea as to what it would look like. The stream behind us, but even 40,000 years would be considerably different. Java man was one of the first Homo erectus, and he was obviously found in Java, but he was tiny, walked upright, bipedal, walked upright, but was only about 1.2 to 1.3 meters high and weighed about 45 to 50 kilos at most. And Java man is the finest example of the link of the common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees. And it's the research that was done on him that was being taught in American schools at the time, in 1925, at the time of the Scopes trial. That's when John Scopes was arrested for teaching evolution in schools under the Butler Act. There was a law called the Butler Act where Christianity had pushed so hard that you were not allowed to teach human evolution, and Scopes got arrested. It was called the Scopes trial, but H.L. Mencken, one of the great authors of the time, and he nicknamed it the monkey trial, which was pretty fitting, really, monkey trial. But right now we are only about 100 meters away from where the first Neanderthal was found, and now they've got a museum here that's not open. But just to be in the air and to see the landscape of these people and where these people used to live, these ancestors of ours, because we still have between 1 to 4% of our DNA is Neanderthal, because when Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals, they cohabitated. The Cro-Magnons were a little bit further south, Neanderthals were a little bit further north, but they did intermingle at times, and they did crossbreed. And East Asia have the most Neanderthals, most Neanderthal DNA, and the least Neanderthal DNA is about 0.3%, which is in Africans. So Africans have very little interbreeding with Neanderthals in the past. And the Cro-Magnons would be a great one. This will be on my early human history trip when I do in the next couple of years, because the Cro-Magnons, they lived several hundred kilometres south of here, but the steppe tundra changed dramatically, so they never really came up this far. But all through south of France and the north of Spain, through the Balboa coast to Altamira, Lascaux 2, Lascaux 4, all these sorts of caves where Cro-Magnons lived, meant that they had distance between them, and they were a little bit standoffish. But evidently at some stage they did interbreed, because our DNA has been researched and it's become evident that we do have traces of Neanderthal in us, which is nothing to be ashamed of. This is history, whether we like it or not, and there's nothing wrong with it. But Neanderthals have been given a bad rap because they weren't as animalistic as we initially thought, because they had a horseshoe hyoid bone in their throat, so they had developed speech, probably not to the extent we had, but they were enough to make enough noises to communicate with one another. And everything kind of came along in leaps and bounds with the Cro-Magnons. The advantage of Cro-Magnons, and the reason they didn't die out and we became who we are, because we all come from the Cro-Magnons, or Europeans anyway, is because we've reached a point that's called some people call it the grandparent age. There's a German author called Olga Suffer, who writes beautifully on this. She talks about the grandparent age, when life expectancy increased to a point where men and women were able to go out and hunt and gather, whilst an older generation looked after children, along with preserving fats and foods that were out of season. And that collective effort about communication and staying in packs, all these things kind of led along in leaps and bounds, and had us come from 20,000 years ago, when the Cro-Magnons were all the different variants of Cro-Magnons: the Aurignacian, the Magdalenian, the Gravettian, Upper Gravettian, Solutrean. All these sorts of groups of people were very primitive back in the Paleolithic age, when they were doing all their cave art down there. They were very primitive, and then bang, we evolved very quickly after that. And it was, like I say, it was a combination of things, including, according to Olga Suffer, and I can't argue with her, she's a professional, grandparent age was the biggest mitigating factor in our ability to increase our lifespan and evolve in the manner in which we did. We were talking about the animals that were painted on the walls of Altamira, and after Altamira was discovered, they opened it up to the public, and people walking through, all their breath would create condensation, and it was affecting the carbon dioxide was affecting the painting. So they built a perfect replica 200 feet to the side of Altamira, and each morning they take 5 people fully kitted up with masks and respirators and full suits. 5 people per day are allowed to go into Altamira. That's what they can afford in order to not damage it. I emailed them a few times. It was tedious work because I had to translate it to Spanish, but you can't get onto an email list to go into there. You just have to be there on the day. It's a potluck thing. Oh, fingers crossed. But when it was discovered, it was a farmer and his daughter, and they'd gone in there, and she looked up and started screaming "El Toro, El Toro," when her father turned around and noticed that there was a massive bull painted on the wall, and the painting complements the shape, so it's 3-dimensional. I'll put an image up.
Where I came from originally,
Yeah.
where the Aboriginals were very, very tall because they ate a lot of seafood.
Oh.
Yeah, very
Well,
healthy.
when we were talking about early man,
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone in Australia knows that Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal, the oldest modern humans on the planet, they arrived in the north of Australia, up near Cooktown, between 70 and 80,000 years ago. But they didn't head inland to arid Australia until about 45,000 years ago. And if you go to Mungo National Park, which is about 4 hours drive from Mildura, heading northeast into central New South Wales, I've been up there, and it looks absolutely amazing, and that's where they found Mungo Man and Mungo Woman. And interestingly, Mungo Woman was crushed up and buried and covered with ochre, red ochre, which is the same that the Cro-Magnons were using for paint in Altamira and Lascaux 2 and 4 about 20,000 years ago after the last glacial movement. And they would quite often do their hand. They would put the red ochre in their mouth and spit it out so you could see all their hands. They were painting oryx, bison, horses, wild horses, and their hands and their feet, and even people on the walls. Sorry, I heard you say it. Say it all again.
Oh, all right. I've got to try and make sure I do it right.
Okay.
I've walked in the footsteps of pharaohs, kings, queens, badasses, knights, criminals. Now I'm walking where we started from, Neanderthal man. Life is done.
Footsteps of early man.
Footsteps of early man.
Yeah, this is older than...
Me.
Well, actually, you know, I have chased a bit of Aboriginal history all over Australia,
Yeah, I know.
which goes older than this.
Yes, I know.
But the fascination
I know.
is still there.
Yeah.
We were just reading that this is the Ravenstein Rock. Well, we knew it was the Ravenstein Rock, but it is the last remains. They call it the last remains of the Neander Valley, and apparently behind the rock, the back of the rock, is all original Neander Valley. I don't know why they claim that or how they managed to claim that, but they know what they're talking about, so... I don't want to take anything away from Gutenberg's press that was in printing press that was invented in the 15th century here in Germany, actually. But many anthropologists argue that the greatest invention in humanity was the eyed needle, which gave us a better ability to create clothing and give us a longer life expectancy. See the high brow ridge on that skull up there? Very high brow ridge. Yeah, they were very different. It's obviously not the only place where Neanderthals lived. They kind of spanned all the way across northern Europe as far as Asia. But given that this is like ground zero, makes it amazing to sit here and look at this kind of landscape, imagining all the human interaction, all the human effect taken out of it. It's really quite a nice spot. And there we are, very, very sad. The museum's closed. It was on this location that the first Neanderthals were found, named after the Neander Valley. How cool is this? This is, I'll come back here in a few years, but I'll start at the Rock of Gibraltar, work my way up all the way through, maybe even, depending on what's going on in Russia, maybe even as far as Kostenki 14, Kostenki 21.